This is a story that I never imagined I'd have to tell, let alone live through. My name is Jack, and until a few months ago I had a family I thought I could trust. I've been married to my wife Emma for 5 years, and together, we've built a life that, in many ways, was everything I had ever wanted. But a series of events, starting with an unexpected lunch invitation, changed everything. It all started when my brother-in-law Greg, whom I've always considered a friend, asked Emma to meet him for lunch. At first, Emma didn't think much of it. She assumed it was about my sister, his wife Lucy. They'd been married for almost 10 years and had 2 kids, so it made sense to her that he might want her opinion on something. Greg was always one of those guys who seemed calm and collected on the surface, but underneath, I now realized there was so much more brewing. He'd always been the kind of guy who could joke around, put everyone at ease, and get along with all the family. He had a charm about him that made him incredibly likable, but looking back, I can now see how easily he was able to manipulate people. Emma was puzzled when Greg texted her, asking if they could meet at a nearby cafe. She told me about it in passing as she was getting ready for work that morning. There was a hint of concern in her voice, but I brushed it off. I didn't think much of it. After all, it wasn't the first time Greg had texted her about something related to the family. He'd asked about schedules, events, and plans before, nothing out of the ordinary. "Do you think it's about Lucy?" Emma asked, still a little uncertain. I shrugged it off and told her to go ahead. "Go find out," I said. "If it's nothing, then no big deal." She agreed, and off she went. I didn't give it another thought. She didn't seem overly worried. Greg had always been good with people. They'd never been anything but friendly with each other, just casual family banter. The next day, Emma came home early from work, her face pale, her eyes wide. I knew something was wrong the moment she walked through the door. I could see it in the way she carried herself, the tension in her shoulders, the look of disbelief in her eyes. "Jack, you need to sit down. I have to tell you what happened," she said, her voice shaky. At first, I thought maybe something had gone wrong with work, or that maybe Greg had confided in her about some personal issue with his wife. But no, this was worse, much worse than I could have imagined. Apparently, Greg had invited Emma to lunch under the guise of discussing something personal. At first, their conversation was harmless, as one would expect. A little small talk about family, work, and the kids. But then it took a turn. After their food arrived, he suddenly looked at her with a strange intensity in his eyes. Emma, completely unaware of what was about to come, said that he complimented her. It was normal at first, just a friendly comment. But then he went on, telling her that he'd been in love with her for years. At first, Emma thought it was a joke, that maybe he was being overly friendly or playful, but no, it wasn't a joke. Greg, my brother-in-law, was dead serious. He told Emma that he had loved her from the moment they first met, that she was the light in his life, and he made promises about how he would treat her if they were together. He said he would give her everything she deserved, that he thought about her constantly, and that he truly believed they were meant to be together. Imagine the shock that must have hit her. Here was the man who was married to her sister, the man she trusted as family, the one who played the role of fun uncle at all the family gatherings, telling her that he was in love with her. Emma sat there speechless. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. But it didn't stop there. Greg didn't just express his feelings and leave it at that. No, he kept talking, telling her how he had been holding these feelings inside for so long. He thought about her all the time, even when she was with me, his brother-in-law. He said that he watched her and admired her from afar, feeling more and more that they were destined to be together. He told her that he thought the chemistry between them was undeniable, that there had been moments between them that he misinterpreted as signs of mutual attraction. Emma was in shock, trying to interrupt him, telling him that he was making a huge mistake, but Greg kept going. He was almost delusional, speaking in a way that seemed rehearsed, as if he had planned this conversation for years, holding on to this twisted fantasy that somehow she would feel the same way. When Emma finally stood up, she walked out of the cafe, her head spinning, and immediately called me. Her voice was shaky as she told me everything. At first, I couldn't process it. It didn't make sense. My brother-in-law, the guy I considered a part of my family, the guy who had been at every family function, who had helped me out in so many ways, was confessing his love for my wife. It felt like a punch in the gut. As she was telling me the story, Greg started texting her. His messages were full of apologies, saying it was a mistake, that he hadn't meant to make her uncomfortable, that he was sorry for everything. But by then the damage was done. Emma was too stunned, too hurt by what she had heard. It wasn't just a confession, it was a betrayal of the highest order. As I listened to her recount the events, I was torn between rage and disbelief. How had this happened? Why had he done this? My mind raced with questions. Was there more to the story than I knew? Should I confront him right away, or was it better to wait and figure out the best way to deal with this mess? But Emma wasn't the only one affected. I knew the impact this would have on my sister Lucy, who had always been so trusting and loving toward her husband. How could I tell her what had happened? Would she ever be able to forgive him? And what would this do to our family? The next few hours felt like a blur. I couldn't concentrate on anything. The house felt eerily silent despite the usual hustle and bustle. My thoughts kept spiraling back to what Emma had told me. Greg, my brother-in-law, the guy I had trusted, spent countless holidays with, and even considered a friend, had just confessed to loving my wife. I kept replaying his words in my mind. How could he do that? What did he expect to happen? How had we missed the signs? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. How had he thought this was okay? My mind kept returning to his claim that he thought Emma was flirting with him. Was he delusional enough to believe that? Emma wasn't a flirt. She was warm, friendly, and always had a playful nature. I knew her well enough to understand that her behavior around Greg had never been anything more than casual. But, somehow, Greg had twisted her kindness and laughter into something it was never meant to be. Emma and I spent the night in silence, her messages from Greg still buzzing in her phone. He had called multiple times, left more desperate texts, each one pleading for her to forgive him and begging her not to tell Lucy, his wife. I felt a deep unease growing inside me, knowing that Greg's actions could tear our entire family apart. But I also knew that hiding this, keeping it a secret, was not an option. I had to do what was right, even if it meant destroying my sister's world in the process. The following morning, as I tried to figure out what the best course of action would be, my phone rang. It was my sister Lucy. I could hear the distress in her voice before she even spoke. "Jack, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. "Greg came to me last night. He said something. I don't even know how to say this." My stomach dropped. I knew exactly where this was headed. Greg had beaten me to the punch, trying to spin the narrative in his favor. He had gone to Lucy, probably in an attempt to control the damage, and he was likely trying to manipulate the situation by painting Emma as the one who had seduced him. "Lucy, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully," I said, trying to remain calm. I explained what had happened, how Greg had confessed his feelings for Emma, and the utter betrayal we felt. I could hear the disbelief in her voice as I spoke, but there was also something else, the sting of betrayal. She wasn't angry yet, she was still processing, still trying to make sense of the madness Greg had created. I can't believe this," Lucy whispered. "Greg told me that Emma was the one who started this. He said she made the first move. I don't know what to believe anymore." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Greg had flipped the script as I feared. He was trying to blame Emma, trying to make her out to be the instigator, the one who seduced him. I didn't know whether to be more angry at him for lying or at myself for not seeing the signs earlier. "Lucy, that's not true," I said firmly. "Greg is lying to you. Emma didn't do anything wrong. He's been hiding these feelings for years. He's been obsessed with her, and he's been manipulating everyone around him." Lucy didn't speak for a moment, and the silence between us felt heavy. She was trying to make sense of it all. I could hear the heartbreak in her voice when she spoke again. "I need to talk to him. I need to hear it from him," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I need to know the truth." "I'll come over," I said. "Let's figure this out together. But this is bigger than just you and Greg. You need to know everything. And I think we need to involve our parents too. This is a mess." I hung up, feeling like I had just stepped into a nightmare. I couldn't even begin to understand how we had reached this point. Greg, the guy who had always been there for every family event, who was supposed to be the golden child of our family, was now a stranger to me. I couldn't comprehend how he had so easily betrayed us all, how he had turned our trust into something twisted and self-serving. Emma and I quickly gathered our things and left to meet Lucy. The tension in the car was unbearable. Emma was still shaken, her hands trembling as she gripped the seatbelt. I could see the guilt written all over her face, but I knew it wasn't her fault. This was Greg's mess, not hers. When we arrived at Lucy's house, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Greg was standing on the porch, his face pale and drawn, his posture slumped in defeat. He was trying to avoid eye contact, his eyes focused on the ground as if he couldn't bear to look us in the eye. Lucy didn't waste any time. She walked right up to him, her face hard as stone, and demanded to know what had happened. Greg opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was crying, deep, guttural sobs that shook his whole body. Seeing him like that, broken and vulnerable, was jarring. But it didn't change anything. It didn't change the fact that he had betrayed my wife, my sister, and our entire family. Lucy didn't flinch. She stood tall and cold, unyielding in her resolve. "Pack a bag and go," she said, her voice firm. "I don't want to see you again. There's nothing you can say that will make this better." Greg tried to plead with her, his voice cracking, but Lucy was having none of it. She turned her back on him, walking over to Emma and pulling her into a tight hug. The bond between the two of them was undeniable, stronger than any of the lies Greg had told. They stood together in silence, offering each other the comfort and strength that only true friends could provide. And there I stood, watching my brother-in-law crumble. His world was falling apart, and in that moment I felt nothing for him. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. The following days were a blur of emotions and difficult conversations. I couldn't seem to focus on anything for long. The weight of what had happened settled in my bones, and the anger that had built up inside me began to feel like a constant presence. I was angry at Greg, at myself for not seeing the warning signs, and at my parents for never noticing the toxicity he had cultivated over the years. But most of all, I was angry at how this betrayal had shattered my sister's life. Lucy, though outwardly calm, was struggling in her own way. She wasn't the type to show weakness or let things break her, but I could tell this was affecting her deeply. She had always been fiercely protective of her family, and now she was questioning everything she knew about her own husband, the man she had trusted to the fullest. As much as I wanted to be there for her, I knew that no words could heal the pain she was feeling. This wasn't something that could be fixed with a conversation. Greg, on the other hand, had disappeared. After packing his things and leaving, we hadn't heard from him. Lucy had made it clear that she never wanted to see him again, and while I couldn't blame her for that, I still found myself wondering what would happen next. He had left our family in chaos, and yet, it seemed like he was the one who was the least affected. His life had crumbled, but in some strange way, it seemed like he had expected this to happen. Like he had prepared himself for the fallout, but not for the magnitude of his actions. The silence in the house was oppressive. The kids, Lucy's two young daughters, didn't understand what was going on, and they sensed the tension in the air. They had always been close to Greg, and now they were left to deal with the confusion and heartache of their family breaking apart. Lucy had already made arrangements to speak with a child psychologist, wanting to make sure the girls had the support they needed to understand the situation. It was heartbreaking to watch, but I knew it was necessary. They needed stability, even if it wasn't in the form of their parents together. I couldn't imagine the pain Lucy was going through, but I tried to be there for her as best I could. We talked late into the night, discussing what to do next, how to move forward, and how we could protect the kids from the fallout. Every decision seemed so monumental. Should she pursue legal action? Should she try to salvage her marriage? Should she even try to reconcile with Greg? The questions seemed endless, but Lucy's resolve was unwavering. Meanwhile, Emma and I had been in a sort of limbo. We had been through our own turmoil, but we were trying to focus on the immediate issues at hand. The messages from Greg kept coming, flooding Emma's phone. Apologies, more begging for forgiveness, more lies. He had even reached out to Emma's parents, attempting to paint himself as the victim, blaming her for his actions as if somehow he was the one who had been wronged. It was infuriating. He had spent years building up this fantasy about Emma, and now he was playing the victim to everyone who would listen. At one point, Emma finally had enough. She blocked his number and started deleting his messages without even looking at them. But that didn't stop him. He created new accounts to reach out, sending more desperate emails and texts. One email in particular stood out, one that made my blood run cold. In it, he detailed his obsession with Emma, how it had begun years ago, and how his feelings had only grown stronger over time. He had confessed his love for her again, insisting that it was a mistake, that it was all his fault, but he still couldn't let go of the idea that they were meant to be together. I couldn't believe what I was reading. This was more than a simple affair or a mistake. This was an obsession, a dangerous delusion that had festered for years, and it was clear that Greg had no intention of stopping. He wasn't just trying to justify his actions, he was trying to manipulate the situation, to convince Emma and everyone else that he had been wronged. He even made vile comments about me, implying that I was somehow inadequate, that I wasn't good enough for Emma. I felt sick to my stomach as I read through his words. It was clear that he had convinced himself that Emma was the problem, not his twisted obsession. After reading the email, I knew something had to change. Greg was dangerous. He had crossed a line and he had no idea how to stop. The next step was to make sure that Lucy and her children were safe, that they weren't exposed to any more of his manipulative behavior. Lucy agreed that it was time to take action. She contacted a lawyer to begin the process of securing a restraining order against Greg. It wasn't a decision she made lightly, but it was necessary. It was the only way to protect herself and her family from the fallout of Greg's betrayal. In the meantime, the rest of the family started to react. My parents were in denial at first, struggling to understand the depth of the situation. They kept defending Greg, insisting that he was a good man who had just made a mistake. But as the days went by, they started to realize the extent of his behavior. They had always excused his actions in the past, but now even they couldn't ignore the truth. My mother, especially, was devastated. She couldn't believe that her son, someone she had always adored, could do something like this. It was hard for me to sympathize, but I understood the pain of seeing a family member betray you in such a way. The strain on my marriage, though, was becoming apparent. Emma and I had been through a lot together, but this betrayal felt like a constant weight. I could see the hurt in her eyes, and I could feel the emotional toll it was taking on her. I tried to reassure her that everything would be okay, but I knew the road ahead would be difficult. We both had our own healing to do, and the situation with Greg was far from over. But as we sat together, planning the next steps and supporting each other, I knew one thing for certain. We were in this together. And no matter what happened, we would make it through. The following weeks after the confrontation with Greg were filled with a mix of anger, confusion, and sadness. As much as we wanted to put this behind us, it felt like every time we took a step forward, we were pulled back into the mess Greg had created. Lucy was putting up a brave front, trying to shield her children from the wreckage, but I could see it was taking a toll on her. It was hard to watch her try to keep the family together while, at the same time, trying to figure out what to do with her broken marriage. The restraining order had been filed, and Greg had received a copy. To his credit, he had stopped trying to contact Lucy directly, but his manipulation tactics continued. He had started reaching out to extended family members, trying to convince them that he was misunderstood, that he had made a mistake, and that Lucy was overreacting. It was hard to hear, knowing how much damage he had already caused. Greg was trying to rewrite the narrative, but the truth couldn't be erased. In the meantime, Lucy was struggling with her next steps. The lawyer had advised her to take things slow, to focus on her kids and her own mental health before making any decisions about the divorce. But Lucy wasn't the kind of person who liked to wait. She wanted action, and she wanted it now. The thought of living under the same roof as Greg was unbearable to her, but she had to face the fact that she couldn't kick him out right away. There were legal steps to take, and it was all happening too slowly for her liking. The hardest part for Lucy, though, was the kids. The girls had no idea what was going on. They knew something was wrong, but they didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation. Lucy had decided to wait until she had a clearer picture of what would happen with the divorce and the custody arrangement before telling them the truth. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, protecting them from a reality that was impossible to shield them from forever. One evening, while we were sitting together in the living room after the kids had gone to bed, Lucy turned to me with a serious look on her face. "I don't know what to do next," she said quietly, her voice breaking. I looked at her, my heart aching for the woman who had always been my pillar of strength. "You don't have to do this alone, Lucy," I said softly. "You're not alone." "I know, but," she paused, wiping away a tear. "I never thought I'd be here. I thought we were a team. We've been through so much together, and now, this. I can't imagine how hard this is for you," I said, reaching over to take her hand. "But you don't have to figure this all out right now. Take it one step at a time." Lucy nodded, but I could tell the weight of the situation was crushing her. She had always been the one to hold everything together, to take care of everyone else, but now she was facing the reality that she couldn't fix this alone. I knew she needed more support than I could give, but I didn't know how to make it better. I just wanted her to feel safe, to feel like she had a way out of the hell Greg had put her in. It wasn't long before we realized that we couldn't put this off any longer. Greg had begun making moves of his own, hiring a lawyer, trying to create his own narrative, and even making excuses for his actions as though he could somehow turn things around. But the more we saw him trying to manipulate the situation, the more Lucy and I realized that we needed to take control of this mess. We couldn't let him continue to distort the truth and wreak havoc on our family. We made the decision to move forward with the divorce. It was hard. Lucy had to finally face the fact that her marriage was over, that Greg wasn't the man she had thought he was. But she had made up her mind. Her main concern was her children and how they would handle this. She knew it would be tough on them, but she had to believe that this was the right choice. The kids deserved to grow up in a stable home, one where they weren't exposed to Greg's toxic behavior. Lucy's lawyer began drawing up the necessary paperwork, and we started preparing for the inevitable legal battle. It wasn't going to be easy. Greg was a firefighter, and his career was well established. But the evidence against him, the texts, the photos, the obsession he had with my wife, was undeniable. The restraining order gave us some peace of mind, but we knew that the real fight would come in court. While all of this was going on, Emma and I continued to support each other through the mess. Emma had been my sounding board, my constant source of support throughout this ordeal. She had been there when Greg's obsession was revealed, and she had stood by me as I dealt with the fallout from the entire family. I couldn't have made it through without her. It felt like she understood the pain I was going through in a way no one else could. Still, the tension in the family was palpable. I had stopped speaking to Greg entirely, but I knew that wouldn't be enough to keep him out of our lives. He had made it clear that he wasn't done with me and he wasn't done with Lucy. As much as I wanted to distance myself from the situation, I knew that we were all tied together. Family, no matter how toxic, always had a way of creeping back in. The truth was, I wasn't sure how much longer I could stand by and watch everything fall apart. Lucy was stronger than anyone gave her credit for, but the emotional toll was starting to show. I had to remind myself that no matter how difficult things got, I couldn't give up on her. We had to fight for what was right. For Lucy, for the kids, and for everyone who had been affected by Greg's betrayal. As the days passed, the reality of what had happened began to set in. Greg's betrayal was not just about a failed marriage, it had torn apart the very fabric of our family. Every interaction felt like a painful reminder of the trust that had been shattered, the relationships that had been damaged, and the lives that had been affected. Lucy's struggle became my struggle, and we faced the challenges together, but the weight of the situation was hard to bear. Lucy was in constant communication with her lawyer, working through the paperwork and preparing for the inevitable court battle. The emotional strain was evident in everything she did. Her once vibrant demeanor had become subdued, her eyes tired from sleepless nights. But through it all, she remained resolute. She knew what needed to be done, and although her heart ached, she wasn't backing down. She was determined to protect her children and herself, and she wasn't going to let Greg's actions define her. Our family, though, was still deeply divided. It was impossible to avoid Greg entirely, especially with the ongoing legal proceedings. He was still living in the guest room of his own home, a silent presence that no one wanted to acknowledge but had no choice but to coexist with. It was a strange situation. My sister, once a loving and supportive partner, now had to face the painful reality that her marriage was over, and her husband was a man she couldn't trust. I tried to stay focused on supporting Lucy, but it was hard. There were moments when the weight of everything would hit me all at once, and I'd find myself shaking with anger and disbelief. Greg had been a part of my life for years, and yet in the span of a few weeks, he had managed to betray everything we had built. He had manipulated his way into the family, used his charm to deceive us all, and twisted everything to fit his own delusions. One evening, after a particularly long day at the lawyer's office, Lucy and I sat down together in the quiet of our living room. The house was empty, the kids asleep, and for the first time in days, we had a moment of peace. We talked, not just about the legal proceedings but about the future. The future felt uncertain, but it was the one thing we had left to hold on to. "I don't know if I can ever forgive him," Lucy said, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to look at him anymore. Everything he said, everything he did, it just feels like a betrayal on a level I never expected." "I don't think forgiveness is the answer right now," I said gently, taking her hand. "Right now it's about healing. And that takes time. What he did is unforgivable, but you don't have to rush into anything." Lucy nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I just want peace. I want my life back. I want my family back." "I know," I whispered. "And you will get that. You've already made the hardest decision. You're doing the right thing." That night, I stayed up late, thinking about everything that had happened. I couldn't help but feel angry at Greg, but I also felt a deep sorrow for him. How could someone who had been part of our family for so long betray us all in such a way? How could he convince himself that his obsession with Lucy was anything but a delusion? But no matter how much I tried to understand, the truth was clear. His actions were unforgivable, and his place in our lives had been irrevocably altered. The following week, Lucy's lawyer set up a meeting with Greg's lawyer. It was time to move forward with the divorce, and the legal process would now take its course. But there was one last thing we needed to confront: Greg's refusal to leave the house. Despite everything that had happened, he was still there, under the same roof as Lucy and the children. The tension was unbearable. The constant presence of the man who had caused so much destruction in their lives was more than anyone could bear. We had hoped that Greg would have enough decency to leave on his own, but it became clear that he wouldn't. Lucy couldn't take it anymore. She needed space, she needed closure. It was time to act. One evening after dinner, Lucy stood up from the table, her face determined. "I'm going to call the lawyer," she said firmly. "I'm done. I can't keep living like this." She picked up the phone and dialed the number, her fingers trembling slightly as she spoke with the lawyer. The conversation was brief but decisive. She explained that she was no longer willing to tolerate Greg's presence in their home. The lawyer assured her that they would handle the situation, and within days Greg was served with eviction papers. It was a hard decision for Lucy, but she knew it was the only way forward. She couldn't continue to share a space with the man who had destroyed everything she had worked so hard to build. The day Greg left was one of mixed emotions. On one hand, there was relief. The tension was finally over, and Lucy could start to rebuild her life. But on the other hand, there was a deep sadness. This wasn't the way it was supposed to be. A family was supposed to be a place of love, support, and trust, but now it felt like a battlefield. And the war wasn't over yet. In the weeks that followed, Lucy began to focus more on herself and her children. She took time off work to reset, to figure out what her next steps would be. The kids were still unaware of the full scope of what had happened, but Lucy knew it wouldn't be long before they started asking questions. She met with a child psychologist to discuss how best to explain things to them when the time came. As for me, I did everything I could to support Lucy through this process. I was there for her every step of the way, but there were moments when I questioned whether I was doing enough. Watching her go through this pain and heartbreak was almost too much to bear. But I also knew that she was stronger than I gave her credit for. She was resilient, and she was going to come out of this stronger than ever. The road ahead would not be easy. There was still a long way to go before things could feel normal again. But for now, we had each other, and we were going to fight through this together. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings, therapy sessions, and moments of quiet reflection. Lucy was determined to rebuild her life, but the emotional scars left by Greg's actions were deep. The children, thankfully, had been shielded from the worst of the storm, though Lucy and I both knew that their innocence would only last so long. The time would come when they would start asking questions, and when that happened, Lucy would need to be ready with an answer that balanced truth and protection. Lucy had always been the strong one, the one who held everything together. Even now, with all that had happened, she continued to be a rock for her children, and it was clear that she was trying to find a way to come to terms with her new reality. She had reached out to a therapist, both for herself and for her kids. The sessions gave her space to talk, to vent, and to process the heartbreak that had shattered her world. I saw a change in her, a kind of quiet determination that I hadn't seen before. She wasn't just going through the motions anymore, she was actively choosing to heal, even if it meant taking small steps each day. While the kids remained unaware of the full extent of Greg's betrayal, there were signs that they knew something was wrong. Their quiet glances, the questions that seemed to linger on the tip of their tongues, all hinted at the fact that their world had been irrevocably altered. I watched Lucy wrestle with how to explain everything to them. She didn't want to shield them from the truth, but she also didn't want to burden them with the details of their father's betrayal. One afternoon after school, Lucy sat down with her oldest, a daughter of 8 years, and carefully explained that things would be different from now on. She told her that Daddy wasn't going to be living with them anymore, and though she tried to keep the explanation simple, her daughter's face reflected the confusion and pain that Lucy had hoped to avoid. The conversation was short, but it was a start. The next few days were spent with Lucy answering her children's questions and providing them with the reassurance they needed. It was an ongoing process, and as much as Lucy wanted to protect them from the heartbreak, she knew that honesty was the best approach. Meanwhile, Greg's attempts to salvage his marriage were as relentless as ever. He continued to contact Lucy, pleading for forgiveness, but she remained steadfast in her decision to move forward without him. His calls were answered with silence, his texts ignored, and his desperate attempts to reconcile met with a cold, resolute wall. I could see the toll it took on Lucy, the guilt, the anger, and the sadness that clung to her, but she refused to let Greg's actions define her. She had made her choice, and now it was time to live with it. I stood by her through it all. I was there for her when the days felt long, when the pain seemed unbearable, and when she was tempted to give in. But I knew that Lucy's strength would carry her through. She had always been the one who held everything together, and now it was my turn to do the same for her. Our bond, though tested by Greg's betrayal, was unbreakable, and together we would face whatever came next. As for Greg, his life was falling apart. The legal proceedings had begun, and it was clear that his actions had destroyed more than just his marriage. He had shattered his relationship with his children, his family, and his reputation. Lucy had made it clear that she wanted nothing more to do with him, and my parents, who had once been so supportive of him, were beginning to see the truth of his character. They had always turned a blind eye to his flaws, but now, faced with the evidence of his obsession and deceit, they couldn't deny the damage he had caused. The truth, as painful as it was, had finally come to light. Greg had tried to twist the narrative, to make himself out to be the victim, but there was no denying the reality of what he had done. He had betrayed his wife, his family, and himself. And now, as Lucy continued to rebuild her life, Greg was left to pick up the pieces of his broken world. There would be no redemption for him, not in the eyes of those who had once trusted him, not in the eyes of the woman he had hurt the most. Months passed and Lucy's life slowly began to settle. She had found a new sense of purpose, a new strength that she had never known before. The divorce was finalized, and though it was a painful process, it was a necessary one. Lucy had reclaimed her life, her family, and her peace. She was no longer the victim of Greg's delusions. She was the author of her own story, and she was determined to write a better chapter for herself and her children. We spent more time together as a family. The kids had adjusted to their new routine, and though there were still moments of sadness and confusion, they were starting to heal. Lucy too had started to heal, slowly but surely. The anger, the hurt, and the fear were still there, but they no longer defined her. She had learned to live in the present, to cherish the good things in her life, and to focus on the future. The past was behind her and she was ready to move forward. In the end, the betrayal of Greg had opened a door to a new life for Lucy and her children. It wasn't the life she had planned for, but it was one she could embrace. It was a life built on trust, resilience, and love, the things that truly mattered. And as for me, I had found a deeper appreciation for the strength and courage of the woman I had always known. Together we had faced the storm, and together we had come out stronger. The journey wasn't over, there would still be challenges ahead, but we were ready to face them. Together. The story reflects the complexities of trust, betrayal, and resilience, offering profound lessons about the importance of protecting one's peace and embracing the power of personal strength. Life can often present painful and unexpected challenges, especially when betrayal comes from those we once trusted the most. However, this story teaches us that even in the face of betrayal, it is possible to reclaim our power and rebuild our lives. The key lesson here is the importance of boundaries, whether it's maintaining emotional distance from toxic relationships or protecting those we love from harmful situations. It also emphasizes the value of family unity and support, showing that even when things fall apart, the love and strength of those closest to us can help us heal and move forward. In times of difficulty, it's important to remember that healing is a process, one that requires patience, self-compassion, and the courage to let go of the past. The story ultimately highlights that resilience is not about avoiding pain, but about acknowledging it, learning from it, and using it to grow stronger. This lesson can be applied to any stage of life, particularly for those who have experienced personal or familial hardships. In the end, peace comes not from denying pain, but from embracing the healing power that lies within. It's a reminder that no matter what life throws our way, we have the strength to overcome and emerge stronger. Thank you for watching. If you found value in today's video, please leave a comment with one below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings on the story we just shared. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more insightful and real-life stories, and make sure to like this video and share it with anyone who might need to hear it. Your support really helps us grow and continue to create content that matters. Again, thank you for being here, and I look forward to hearing from you in the comments. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.